Ancient civilization was schizophrenic.
Ever hear of this book? My friend since high school who got his doctorate studying this theory, and I trust quite a bit, says he finds fault with it because ancient Indian cultures show plenty. Basically, there was a huge shift in awareness from the late Bronze Age period into the Iron Age, which changed the way humanity understood itself and its environment. He argues that humans were motivated by hallucinatory sensory data that compelled them to behave a certain way. Certainly, humans back then didn't question what their duties were or how they should act. Even the king and priest seemed pretty motivated by the commands of deities as opposed to rational thought or free-thinking ideas of civic administration. It catches my attention simply because Bronze Age culture seems so alien compared to everything that came afterward. Perhaps the trauma of the Bronze Age collapse triggered humanity into searching for a better way to conceptualize itself? I do not understand fully what Jaynes is talking about, and I'm probably butchering his ideas here. Nonetheless, the wiki is worth checking out.
Philip K. Dick talks a lot about this. This sounds similar to the stoned ape theory of Terence McKenna. Basically, the idea that for most of primate evolution, they were ingesting psychoactive chemicals from plants and mushrooms, which dramatically influenced the evolution of our minds and their natural state. Then at some point, it mostly ceased, and everything following it has been a sort of collective withdrawal symptom because our minds weren't really meant to function without those mushroom substances. Tativa Mezi, this theory is dumb. OP says humans were motivated by hallucinatory sensory data. Nah, that's just a rationalization for avoiding the fact that pre-Bronze Age people were big into substances and altered states of consciousness. All mystery rites involve a death and rebirth, which is induced by poison, hallucinogens, and antidotes to avoid one actually dying in the process. These include all of the Bible, since it is an Orphic text that predates Greeks themselves, and all the Hebrew translations came later. First Genesis is in Minoan Greek, and at the time Hebrew had like 8K words at best. It never ceased up until the fall of Rome, but agriculture messed up human brain development by a lot, as well as general physiology, lots of problems especially during birth. Hence medicine was a woman-centric art, and perpetuated by them, most rites came from women for this reason. Cults of mother goddesses, etc. It wouldn't have happened everywhere all at once, and there could be many such ingredients that all contribute in part to the modern mindset. Most human beings in history starved to death, but every single person just happened to have a steady supply of hallucinogenic substances? Okay, dude. Never in my life have I seen a hallucinogenic thing growing anywhere. By the way, some mushrooms love growing out of the dung of grazing animals, for pastoralists, and ergot is a fungus that can infect grains and create LSA, for farmers. Even hunter-gatherers in the middle of the rainforest make aya from plants they got around them. Maybe the reason you never see lucid herbs is because you're not much of a plant buff. Ancient peoples were intimately aware of the natural world around them and were frequently going out into it to gather plants and resources, etc. What are we talking about here? Who's going around picking mushrooms out of cow dung? And another thing, if these substances are the keys to unlocking higher consciousness, then why are all the users strung out losers? They are not out there building civilizations. Anyways, maybe a monkey got elevated at some point in history somewhere. Maybe we didn't evolve from monkeys at all. Who knows? At the end of this month, it will be a pretty high figure, bud. Also, the Bronze Age culturally was the same as our current period, the first stable period that humans have had since pre-deluge, which allowed them to finally settle, create civilizations, and subsequently to peak and go down into degeneracy until the inevitable collapse happened. The wheel of time just keeps on spinning, you know. This is what happens when a materialist rationalist tries to comprehend a spiritual phenomenon. He's definitely onto something, but he's speaking like a dummy. There's no bicameral mind. It's just in the pre-materialist modern age, the people's minds were more sensitive to spiritual influences. Or rather, they could recognize at an early age the difference between a spiritual, pneumatic phenomenon and a psychological, psyche phenomenon. Whereas nowadays, everyone is psychologizing everything, even their authentic spiritual experiences, due to rationalism. Instead of an ancient bicameral mind, we should speak of the modern monoptic mind. I have the kind of voices in my head. Jaynes talks about the ancients having all day every day, but even I suppress them and psychologize them away constantly because of my rationalistic education. Enough said. Whoa, interesting source on Minoan Greek Genesis. I've read most of the book. Yeah, it's interesting. Basically, he says that due to neuroplasticity, our brains could have easily changed due to events that unfolded in the world at the time. Any books that talk about the modern monoptic mind? Schizophrenia, perhaps? Yeah, humanity's mind and conceptual capacity seems to be growing in stages and bursts. I think they hit a wall of sorts, realized they couldn't just LARP with figments of the imagination, and sort of woke up from the dream the previous eras of humanity were moping through. I think we're reaching a similar era. The video age has humanity really questioning itself again, now that we have more accurate data of ourselves and the world around us through video and HD photography. Because our modern society actively blocks and denies anyone they suspect of not being 100% sober or 100% drunk of any and all access to resources. But back then, everyone just expected the shaman to be elevated, so being intoxicated didn't hurt his standing in society or force him to be kicked out of it, but quite the opposite. Wow, Anon, almost like killing the invaders for the 20th time really does a number on you. Capitalism is the schizophrenic global mind consciousness. As productivity compounds, the process of capital interrupting social organization accelerates and will, or already, has exceeded the speed of humanity's ability to counter it. This runaway positive feedback loop leads to the emerging global post-human consciousness, where humanity will wither away as an obsolete input to production, and the Earth itself will melt into a nano-machine goo of intelligence. There is something to say for the allowing of same, no? Like the freedom itself the Greeks had, the amount of not yet discovered land, things in general, the capability of saying screw it, I'm a band with 20 guys and be a tyrant Lowell, is something that has been impossible for at least 200 years now. With our dystopic govs and vast amounts of poisons everywhere, I really have to be pessimistic about that. The men that could still maybe do that died in the last World War. There is a reason the Renaissance began with Greco-Roman rediscovery. We need a new source, a new old input for shaking things up. Sorry I oversold it. It's just that in the earliest Genesis we have, easy to find, there are some letters that were used in Minoan Greek and in disused already by classical times after Homer, and Hebrew is post all that. It also starts with, this is the book of the generation of Uranos and Gaia. The word Genesis isn't even in the text, so reference to the creation of man, which is quite funny. Based land poster, may AOE grant you many lemurs. Nobody is saying this, you dummy. Any books that talk about the modern monoptic mind? C.S. Lewis, The Abolition of Man is a good start, and his The Discarded Image. What about the schizophrenia, perhaps? Nah, that's when they become uncontrollable and diabolically possessive. Look up Jerry Marzinski. I can suppress them as much and whenever I want. It's not like they've invaded me completely, it's just I can tune in. I'm not that sensitive though. Yeah, we need another renaissance of sorts, where people of actual objective truth and intelligence are allowed to rule instead of pretty people with rich parents. Fascinating. I have long suspected the origin text of the Hebrew faith to be adulterated. I can't quite seem to put my finger on it. I searched for this first copy of Genesis, but I'm turning up blank. Are you sure you can't produce a link? Thus a wild guess. Humanity grew up in one aggressive world, where our most valuable asset/edge was throwing rocks with calculated trajectory, which other primates don't. Hominids killed and wiped out other hominids. No complex bonds, more like mere animals. This caught the eye of some eldritch horror habitant from a higher ecosystem. A parasymbiotic bond born between both beings. the host gaining one single ego, and his society begins to development through empathetic progress, less monstrous conflict. Someday, one event messes with the hive ego. Here we are, masters of our own destiny. Yes, I'm elevated. In reply to the recommendation of C.S. Lewis, the abolition of man is a good start. Thanks, homie bump.